Okay, welcome. Today, I'd like to tell you a story, a production story about a hybrid app which we built, and what can you do with Ruby today. But let's start with an announcement which was made on 15th of February. Apple confirms that it's killing home screen web applications in the EU. So that means progressive web applications known as PVAs. On March 1st, they revert this decision and they say, okay, we will still support it. But what does it mean? What does it mean for the future of PVA? Are we certain that they will have the support which they need? And does Apple commit to supporting them or not? It doesn't seem like they have a strong commitment. So I'm Hana. For those who didn't meet me, my formal background is in judgment and decision-making psychology. I learned R during my dissertation thesis. Then I was working as a paragliding instructor for 5 years. And my daughter was born. And I realized I want to have something which is not weather dependent, when I can work flexible. I always liked to code a bit, and so I started to work as a self-employed web developer. And I was freelancing under the company of my company, Xionline. Then I started to teach moms web development, because, you know, life as a web developer can be lonely if you just sit by the computer by yourself. And I was missing this this connection and teaching people. And the interesting thing about this course was that the moms could bring their kids with them. And 30 to 50% of participants actually did it. But they didn't have to do something for their kids. They could do something for themselves. Then I stumbled upon the Ruby Monsters, which is a meetup in Zurich, and it's pretty much a free Ruby course. And that really changed my life. I stayed there for 2 years. I started to learn Rails, and then I started to coach there. I also lectured at Levagon Bootcamp. And, oh yeah, my son was born. It's not the same baby, they just look the same as all the babies. And when I was freelancing, I did a lot of WordPress websites for small businesses, but I knew that I want to do more Ruby and more Rails. And even though I managed to smuggle some of the Rails projects to my clients, it wasn't really the best fit. So I knew that I want to work for a different company, and I started to work as a contractor for a startup called Reef. And after a year, I joined GitHub, when I'm working right now for more than 2 years in a code scanning team. And what would be a presentation without the cat? So this is our cat. And now, enough about me, what we will cover today. So I'd like to talk about the differences between PVAs and hybrid apps, then how Flamingo, the app which we are building, came to life, and also how we solved things like notifications, service worker, Hotwire, and how the future with Rails 8 could look for mobile devices and Rails apps. So PVA is characteristic that it's just one code base. It's just, in the case of Rails, it's just one main Rails application, and it's expected to work on all the devices. So in the browsers, on the tablets, on mobile devices. And the big advantage of it, that it doesn't require separate bundling or distribution. That means you don't have to submit it to publication in a Google Play or App Store. And it needs website manifest. In comparison, the hybrid app has one main Rails application, and then you have iOS and Android native wrappers. So you see that in this case, we have 3 code bases. The main one is in Ruby, and we have a bit of Kotlin and a bit of Swift. The goal is all that it works on all devices, web, tablets, and mobile devices, but it does require separate bundling and distribution. That means you want to submit the apps to app stores. If we look at the example of this app, so if you, with a PVA, you can also, without it, you can save any website on your mobile phone to your home screen and access it from there. In the past, Apple and also Android provided kind of natively looking shells for those PVAs. Right now, it's not the case, and it's not clear how it will be in the future, but it doesn't seem very good. So you see the difference on the left side. Yes, it's pretty much a website loaded in your browser. And on the right side, it's the iOS web app. So you see that we have like the native navigation on the bottom and also nav bar with the information on the top. I briefly talked about website manifest. So what is it? We said that PVAs need website manifest. It's pretty much a JSON file with the various specifications. The important bits are the name of the app and also the icons. In our case, you maybe saw it, that it's a JSON ERB file. So we also have a controller with the show action and the route. If we want to compare PVAs and hybrid apps, then we see that PVA needs a manifest and service walker, but hybrid apps don't necessarily, the Rails app, because those are in the native shells. For PVA, you don't have to, or sometimes can't, distribute it to the App Store. With the hybrid apps, you have to. So in a PVA, you don't have native apps. With a hybrid app, you do as a wrapper. And then as a result of that, with the hybrid apps, you also can use the native features. So for our Flamingo app, we actually do have all of those, even if it's a hybrid app. And we will talk about that later, why that's the case. Well, the big advantages of hybrid apps is that the business logic is just in one place, and it's not replicated in your Rails app, Android app, and iOS app. That also means you need to spend less hour coding because you have one main code base. You don't need to go through the web update for every change. What we like about Rails is that we can iterate fast. And so if you have this hybrid app and the people already downloaded the first version, but your views and your logic comes from your Rails app, the moment you commit and deploy, all your customers and users have the newest version without the need to update their web apps. But there are also some disadvantages. One of them, you still need to write a bit of Kotlin and Swift. You do need to maintain 3 applications, even though 2 of them are small. And lastly, you do have to submit the native application, so you do need to go through that process. But if you do it smartly, you don't have to do it very often. So I was talking about Flamingo, but what it actually is. Flamingo is a communication app which should connect the school, so the staff, teachers, caretakers, and administrators with the parents, so they can exchange information efficiently and find everything. When we started this project, this was very roughly what we wanted and what we knew we need. We needed a feed with the news, so that's information which school sends to all parents, but the parents can't really react on them. And then we wanted to chat between either individual users or different message groups. And I won't talk about it, but that was a really big part of that application, because in our school, they have very different criteria how those groups are built. So all those groups need to work. And then we had like models for users, students, school classes. And the main point was that it will work on both mobile devices or on both operating systems. So that's why we decided to go with a shell approach and hybrid app, to having notifications clearly working on mobile devices. So as I said, we needed 3 repositories with 1 Rails and other Swift and Kotlin. We were lucky to find this book from Ayush, and for setting up the native shells, we followed it pretty closely, at least at the beginning. And then what we didn't know that we will need, how it often is, was also about the notifications. We were prepared to be implementing iOS and Android notifications. But it turned out the school staff, they don't want to use it from the application from their mobile devices, they want to use it from the browser, from Edge, namely. And they requested browser notifications because, I don't know, otherwise they wouldn't see what's happening. So this feature wasn't on our roadmap, and yeah, we had to deal with it. But let's look at the app notifications first. We use Gem from Exit, Chris Oliver, which is called Noticed, and it can do individual and bulk deliveries, and as you see, they can support many ways of deliveries. For us, the important one was the Firebase messaging, which is a cross-platform messaging solution, which lets you send notifications at no cost to both Android and iOS. Since we started with this app, Chris did a big update, so there's a new version released, which is great because the Gem is better, it provides more functionality, but it also needs a lot of rewrite because of that, so I won't go into the details how we implemented it, because by now it's outdated and you should follow the new version. And then let's look into browser notifications. So if you don't know, those are the little things which pop up on the side of your screens. And the important thing is that it's delivered via user's browser, also when the website itself is closed, but the browser needs to be open. And it can hold some interesting information about who's sending the message, the title, or the message itself. So what do we need? In order to make web push notifications work, we need a service worker, push API, which is a browser feature, and push server. To help with this, we used another gem, which is called web push, and it helped us a lot with, for example, managing the VAPID keys. So VAPID key is a voluntary application server identification, and it's pretty much a pair of public and private key, which makes sure that the server is securely connected to the browser. So I said we need a service worker, which then uses the push API to communicate with a push server. This is like more of an example, but this is our service worker with 3 main methods. We see it here. And it listens to these 2 events, push and push subscription change. And then it updates the subscription in our Rails app with a new endpoint or with the information about the current endpoint, authentication, and key. So in order for web push notifications to work for the user, we need that the browser supports the notifications. Then we need that the user grants the permission for those notifications. We also need that the browser supports service workers. And then the service worker needs to be installed and active. So this is the reason why we also have a service worker in our hybrid app, because we need it to support those web notifications. Most of logic of this lives in a stimulus controller. It's a push controller, and there we deal with all these checks and settings. To make our life easier, we added a bit of debugging to our settings on the user. So if you click Show Details, we can check that all those conditions which are mentioned, in which state they are, and if they're fulfilled. We also make use of Hotwire. So we use turbo frames to, for example, edit conversation information on one screen. We use turbo streams to append new messages in the chat. And then we use broadcasting to show new conversation as they're created and also new news. So the index view will be automatically updated for all users if a new news object or conversation is created. And now let me talk about some tips. So what made our life easier was to publishing the app early, because the review may take a couple of days. So you want to be prepared and do it ahead of time. To publish an iOS application, you will need an Xcode, and then you need to create Apple developer account. And it's really good because when you're submitting the app, you need to provide screenshots for iOS, ideally also iPad, and various descriptions. For Android, it's similar. You need to configure your app for release in Android Studio, and then you need to build a release version of your app, and again, prepare screenshots and app descriptions. What is a big advantage of all those softwares, so both Android Studio and Xcode Studio, is that you can test pretty much everything. How is it connected with your main Rails app? So there are less surprises once you actually publish your app. The downside of it is that it's not 100% one-to-one what's happening in the test and what's happening really in production. So you should count with the time that you will need to test things in a real life and have time to fix them. In our case, we knew what we want to have in the navigations, or what main views we want, but not all of them were ready. So what you can still do, you can prepare the native shells with all the controls you need, and then decide what can you use as a filler for that time. In our case, this was calendar feature. So it wasn't the highest priority. We discussed that we want to have it. It wasn't decided what will be exactly shown, if it's the schedule for a class or for a student, or if it's the school calendar. But there was existing calendar for the school, so we published the app with a calendar, so maybe you don't see it. But here, it's a little calendar icon. We published it with this filler, and once we are ready with our calendar feature, we can just update our Rails app, and all the users will get the new feature without the need of updating the apps in the app stores. I mentioned that for the app notifications, so iOS and Android notifications, we used the Notice gem and Firebase Cloud Service messaging. Even though the Firebase messaging supports browser push services, each browser actually has their own service. So in a way, you don't need the Firebase, and it's kind of easier to implement it because these services are gifted to you. And browser push notification stuff is easier, but it needs way more JavaScript. But that's what we did. So we used all the push services from the browsers. And then when we looked at our production data to see what services actually our users registered with, we see that we have Firefox, Chrome, Safari, and also Edge there. So pretty much our users are getting notifications on all main browsers. One of the biggest advantages is the development speed and short feedback loop. That's what we all like about Rails, right? That we can iterate fast, we have a feature request, we find a bug, we can fix it, push it, and our users have the enhanced experience. So no need to change for updates or submitting the apps, and then you don't know which users actually updated their app and which are on the older version is a really big advantage. Especially in the early life of an app, this is very valuable because you can react on the feedback really swiftly. And so now let's talk about Rails 8 and its promises. What the future holds for PVAs and mobile Rails on mobile applications. When I was writing these talk proposals back in May, I did a short search and I found that it looked really promising that Rails will add way more PVA support out of box and also notification support. So this is one of the issues which was open on 27th of December. And you see this one is also closed. So it's about adding default PVA files to a Rails generator. That PR was merged and there is commented out a service worker or no, this is a, yes, this is the service worker, right? But it's not really clear in what state this is. And since then, there's no more information. On the same day, another issue was opened, which talks about extracting action notifier for push notifications. So this would be great because so we needed to use one separate gem or two different gems to make the notifications work for both mobile devices and also web browsers. So it looks really nice. But so according to my information, Rails 8 may be announced during the Rails World, which is happening in September. And while researching this, there's no more information about what is going on with this issue. There's no pull request, there's some conversation going on, but all of it is rather of older date. So it would be great to have that implemented. It would help the apps, the hybrid apps with the native shells, but also the PVAs. But it's not clear. I think this is part of the surprise, what will come or not come with Rails 8, and we will have to wait for the answer. So what is the future of the Rails apps of mobile devices? With the PVAs, the advantage is that they're way simple to set up. The disadvantage right now is that it doesn't seem that Apple will commit to supporting them. On the other hand, it seems that they are reducing the support, that they are not allowing the push notifications from PVA. And so, yeah, it may work, but we don't know. On the other hand, for hybrid apps, it's a bit more hassle to set them up because you do have to create two separate apps with Swift and Kotlin, which Ruby developers not necessarily are that acquainted with. But it's still less hassle than having three fully fledged apps. And we already have many great tools from community, which makes it easier to build a hybrid app. So we have the Notice gem from Chris. We have the web push gem to help us with browser notifications. Then we have the Rails and Hotwire codex from Ayush to show us what steps we need to follow and how to make use of Turbo Native. We also have Stimulus and Turbo. And with all these tools, it's way easier than it was in the past to create a hybrid app. So Rails 8 looked like it's full of promises. If they will fulfill them or not, we will have to see. But it would be beneficial for both hybrid apps and PVAs if the action notifier would be indeed extracted. So I would say that the future is bright with or without Rails 8 PVA support. And also today we can build great applications for web and for mobile devices. And with that, thank you very much. If we didn't talk, let's do that today. And we can also connect on other platforms. And I prepared for you a list with the resources. They're really small, but I'll post it somewhere. So later you will be able to access them. Thank you.
Any questions? Are you ready for the questions, or maybe later in the booth?
You can have questions. The thing is, with all those controllers, stimulus, and notifications, I may need to look into the code to give you a reasonable answer, but it depends on your questions. So if you have some, you can ask them.
I'm quite surprised you didn't use Strada. It's also on the list, right?
Yes. So Strada was still new when we started with the app, and also when the tutorial was written. So we didn't go with it because it's another thing which you first need to learn to use it. And for what we needed, this was really a satisfying approach, because we were able to get those native apps running in a really short time. And what also Turbo Native already provides is this native app helper app. So in your views and also in your backend code, if you need to decide that something else needs to happen in the web view and in the app view, it's really easy with those helper methods and if statements. But yeah, that would be one of the things to explore, but we are focused to deliver working product now and not necessarily explore everything. But yeah, it would be one of the things. And our next steps are definitely to make use of the new noticed gem features. So we need to do this big update. Good Job, which we are using for delivering the notifications, also had a major release with breaking changes. So we first will focus on those.